Welcome to the second plenary session of the 62nd Annual Conference of Indian Society of Labour Economics. As is customary, this is one of the most important lectures of the conference, the V.V. Giri Memorial Lecture, named on its founder, the founder of the Indian Society of Labour Economics. The lecture is being chaired by Professor Deepak Nayyar, who is the president of the Indian Society of Labour Economics and was also former Vice-Chancellor, University of Delhi. The lecture is being delivered by Ms. Meher Pudumjee. She is Chairperson, Thermax Limited, Pune. She is delivering a lecture on the topic Social Compact, the beginning of a journey towards dignity and equity of the informal workforce. Before I hand over the reins of the session to Professor Nayyar, I will just give a brief introduction, sir, of Ms. Pudumjee. Ms. Meher Pudumjee is the chairperson of the Thermax Limited company focused on providing sustainable energy and environment solutions, a postgraduate in chemical engineering from Imperial College of Science and Technology, London. Ms. Meher joined Thermax as a trainee engineer in August 1990. Thereafter, she, along with her husband, Feroz, played a role in turning around a small subsidiary of the company in the UK. After her return to India in 1996, she was appointed on the board of directors and worked closely in the finance function of Thermax. She was also involved with overseeing a joint venture company focused on drinking water, as well as the air pollution control businesses of the company. In the years 1999 to 2001, she played an active role in the turnaround of Thermax. Meher took over as chairperson in 2004 after the retirement of Ms. Anu Aga. She represented India at the Asian Business Women's Conference in Osaka in 2006. The World Economic Forum in 2008 selected her as a young global leader for her professional accomplishment, commitment to society, and potential to contribute to shaping the future of the world. She was selected CEO of the year 2009 by Business Standard. She served as the chairperson of Pune Zone Council of the Confederation of Indian Industry. When a member of CII's Young Indians, she chaired the National Employability Initiative. Ms. Pudumjee was all set to join us physically, but we do know due to the cancellation of her flight, and she has to take another flight tomorrow morning to the US, she is not able to join us physically here, but we are very thankful to her for joining us online and taking time out for this lecture.
Let me welcome you to this V.V. Giri Memorial Lecture. It would be appropriate for me to say a few words about Mr. V.V. Giri. He was born in Behrampur, Orissa, and educated at the University of Dublin. During his illustrious political career, V.V. Giri held several positions. I mentioned just a few. He was a member of the Central Legislative Assembly from 1927 to 1930. He was a member of, he was the elected president of the All India Trade Union Congress between 1926 and 1942, Minister of Labour in the Ministry in Madras Presidency, 1937 to 1946, Minister of Labour in the Government of India, 1952 to 1954, Governor of Uttar Pradesh, 1957-58, Vice President of India during 1967-1969, and later President from 1969 to 1974. He wrote extensively, among others, 2 books titled Industrial Relations and Labour Problems of Indian Industry, and numerous articles on labour and on trade union movements in India. In 1975, he was awarded the Bharat Ratna, the highest national honor. Most importantly for us in this auditorium, he was among the co-founders of the Indian Society of Labour Economics and guided the society as its president for life until his death in 1980. Let me now welcome Ms. Meher Pudumjee, Chairperson of Thermax Limited, who is going to deliver the V.V. Giri Memorial Lecture. We are sorry, Meher, that you're unable to be with us in person, but we quite understand that your flight was cancelled and you had no means of getting to Dehradun or Roorkee. Ms. Pudumjee is going to speak about an initiative that she's started and is closely associated with, described or termed social impact. The title of her lecture is The Beginning of a Journey Towards Dignity and Equity of the Informal workforce. As she has explained in the abstract of her lecture, which has been circulated to all of you, the pandemic actually was an eye-opener for many people, for most of us, and for the plight of millions of workers engaged in the informal sectors, who with the draconian lockdowns lost livelihoods and were subjected not just to deprivation, not just to humiliation, they were reduced to seeking shelter and food with charities when they were stranded in cities. And this led a few people, including Ms. Pudumjee, to make a beginning through what she describes as the Social Compact Initiative, in collaboration with companies that had similar sentiments and concerns in Mumbai, Pune, and Ahmedabad, as well as some NGOs. And it is essentially a self-motivated attempt by the corporate sector, led by a few motivated, committed individuals who are trying to see how we might improve the living conditions and the well-being of millions of workers in the informal services sector who have no social security, no social protection, no secure employment, and decent work. Our ILO colleagues are not here, is a far cry for most of them. I will now turn you over to Ms. Pudumjee. Meher, let me invite you to deliver the V.V. Giri Memorial Lecture.
So a very good afternoon to all of you, and you've very kindly mentioned that I'm really very sorry that I'm not there in person, but SpiceJet cancelled the aircraft last minute, and unfortunately I'm flying out early tomorrow morning, and so I couldn't take the risk of taking an earlier flight. So I'm really very, very sorry. But I'm missing out on being there in Roorkee with all of you, and especially knowing that it was the first engineering college to start in India, as well as someone mentioned, it was the first place where trains started. So it's my loss of not being with all of you, but thank you very much to Dr. Sharma and his team for agreeing to host me virtually. I'm not really sure why I have been invited by Dr. Sharma to this very illustrious gathering, because I am not an economist, I am not a researcher, a scholar, or an expert on the theme for this year's event, the employment challenge, migration and development, and social protection for workers. However, my heartfelt gratitude to the Indian Society for Labour Economics and IIT Roorkee for inviting me here to give the prestigious V.V. Giri Memorial Lecture. It is a true honor and a pleasure to be here with you virtually. I also want to congratulate ISLE for their 65th year, and I want to congratulate IIT Roorkee for celebrating their 175th year. That's quite a milestone. Congratulations, all of you. The three topics that you've chosen for this conference couldn't have been more apt, especially post the pandemic. In fact, I was listening to the session this morning, and I was listening to Dr. Sharma speak. And it was quite shocking to me to hear the statistics, where he spoke about 66% educated youth being unemployed in 1920 as compared to 37% in 1983. That's a pretty significant number. So I think we have a real challenge in India. But coming to the topic that I want to speak to, I think my understanding of the crisis in the informal workforce is very recent, and I am still learning. I thought I would share my own experience over the past 2 years to provide you with a better insight into our journey, what we've started, and what motivates us to work towards this cause, which is to ensure equitable and dignified lives for vulnerable workers in India. I am what in academia we refer to as a corporate stakeholder representative and a philanthropist. The journey to this movement began with questions and realizations during the first COVID-19 pandemic-induced lockdown in March 2020. I will never forget those images. They brought tears to my eyes, seeing the exodus of migrant workers, men, women, and children, walking back home for miles, left stranded, many dying, without employment, money, food, and shelter. These people were visible for the first time and begged a deeper look into who they were and what underlay their extreme vulnerability. The following facts came to light. 85% of India's non-agrarian workers are informally engaged. That's about 200 million informal workers with no written contracts and often without local documentation to establish their identity in the city. That makes them untraceable, invisible, and therefore ineligible for public schemes or the public distribution system. Hence, no ration, no public housing, no public health care, and no local voting rights. TB amongst them, tuberculosis, is twice the average, and they are exposed to grave risks of injury and accidents at work. Nearly half of their small earnings are spent just on food and fuel. The rest is sent back home to their families. With low wages, they are in constant debt and risk becoming bonded. They are largely from Dalit and Adivasi communities and are therefore widely victimized based on their caste and their class. And as per McKinsey and Company, women's jobs were 1.8 times more vulnerable to loss due to the pandemic than their male counterparts. This has long been the status quo in India's leading cities. Cities that offer extreme privilege and extreme poverty to different parts of the population. The World Inequality Report 2022 reveals that India is amongst the most unequal countries in the world, with rising poverty and an affluent elite. The report highlights that the top 10% and top 1% hold 57% and 22% of the total national income respectively, while the bottom 50% share has gone down to 13%. While this divide has existed for a while now, the pandemic only brought it to the surface and pushed some business leaders to challenge this status quo in their own company ecosystem. We take care of our white and permanent blue-collar workers, but somehow, when someone is not on our permanent rolls, we don't see them. They are either invisible to us or else we just don't care. We seem to take responsibility for those that belong to our payroll, not a contractor's payroll or a vendor who has been predominantly serving us. While there are policies for welfare, lack of concern by employers and layers of value chain often constrain them from percolating to the last level. We human beings are strange. We don't particularly have stringent safety standards for them, even though we may give our own workers safety harnesses and a lot of training. We don't really know or care to know about whether they are healthy. Some people don't even offer their canteen facilities to informal workers. We have no clue whether they get enough money to make two ends meet, especially living in cities. It's almost like operating two sets of standards for all those that are helping us achieve our top line, our bottom line, and our market cap. It's what we saw during COVID that opened our eyes to this significant vulnerability, inequity, and inhumanity. A few of us in industry, decided to understand the problem and therefore collaborated with NGOs working on the ground for years together who know the situation, so that collectively we can take concrete steps forward to make life more equitable, dignified, safer, and humane for our labor force in our sphere of influence, whether they are impermanent or on contract, contractors, workers at the company's manufacturing and customer sites, or workers of vendors and channel partners who largely depend on the principal company and can be influenced to take affirmative action for their informal workers. This gave birth to an initiative that we started called the Social Compact, or SOCO. Many people ask, what does this term mean? It's a voluntary or implicit agreement amongst our members to cooperate for social causes. When we refer to members here, it is industry and their sphere of influence to begin with. Together, we agreed on the core tenets of SOCO, starting with a common minimum undertaking that is legal and that we all hold ourselves accountable to. The reason I mention legal is because there are so many laws that govern us in India, both central and state, that industry may not even be aware. And sometimes, even if aware, it may be difficult to follow, or industry may choose to ignore them. We'd like to move to additional good practices with an industry-focused lens, and finally, hopefully, define a set of parameters that outline gold standard working conditions. SOCO aspires to cover 1 million informal workforce spread over the ecosystem of 150 companies in India over the next 5 years. I'm actually hoping we cover a lot more than 1 million. SOCO was conceived to realize this vision in partnership with the NGO Dasra and other like-minded corporates across Mumbai, Pune, and Ahmedabad. Dasra brought together unlikely partners in a rare setting. Corporates are working alongside Ajivika Bureau and Center for Social Justice. And Rajiv is sitting in the audience, so thank you, Rajiv. NGOs who have provided services and support to vulnerable workers for decades to find solutions for informal workers engaged within industry. Social Compact was kicked off the ground in September 2020 with the ambition of ensuring greater equity and dignity for industry-engaged informal workers and to mainstream the collective aspiration that a responsible business is equal to a successful business. The ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance paradigm, is gaining great traction globally. The world, including India, is becoming more thoughtful towards the E, or the environment, which is critical and much needed. Can we become as thoughtful towards our fellow human beings? It took a pandemic to push India towards acknowledging the social inclusion, or S, aspect of ESG. Thus, not only do we need to shift focus towards strengthening the social aspect of ESG, and one way is through the Social Compact, but also accelerate systemic efforts. First, meet the basics before we can embark upon growth. In the pilot phase, we coined the aspiration, ensuring dignity and equity, irrespective of their formal or informal status. SOCO is a self-driven voluntary journey focusing on 6 critical outcomes, which underpin the vulnerability of these workers. They include, number 1, wages, not just minimum wages, but hopefully living wages that enable a life of dignity for workers and their families. Number 2, health, social security cover, and grievance redressal mechanisms to enable them to weather a crisis with dignity and adequate support. Number 3, maximizing safety as per the type of work rather than the type of engagement, to protect all workers, formal or informal equally, against occupational hazards and risks. Fourth, gender equality in pay, treatment, as well as opportunities for women. Fifth, facilitating workers' access to government entitlements that they are eligible for, but don't know about or are unable to access or use, such as e-Shram registration, a functional Aadhaar card, Ayushman Bharat, and other schemes meant to offer support. And the sixth is the future of work, which not only emphasizes on the white-collar worker, but extends upskilling, reskilling, and growth opportunities for blue-collar and informal workers as well. Apart from improved worker practices within our organization, it also provides a group of like-minded peers to experiment with innovative solutions and share their experiences. The idea is not a one-upmanship or being ashamed that we haven't done certain things. The purpose is to think about equity, fairness, and dignity of humanity and work towards it by learning and by hand-holding each other. The foremost milestone for SOCO was in bringing together industry and civil society into a co-solutioning relationship towards a common cause. And this has only grown stronger over the 2 years and set the tone for an efficient exchange of expertise, ideas, and resources on the way forward. Our own company, Thermax, is amongst the 16 that have undertaken or signed up for the SOCO journey. It started with an audit, although within SOCO, we call it a self-reflection tool, since it isn't meant to be threatening. This tool converts the above-mentioned 6 outcomes into 30 standards. It allows the company to map the maturity of its worker practices along each standard for its own fixed-term workers, as well as what it knows about the maturity of practices followed for contractual and supply chain workers. Ajivika Bureau then visited 2 of our factory sites, 2 customer sites, and 7 vendors, and had detailed discussions with workers and management to corroborate the self-reflection mapping with on-ground findings. There were several findings, a few of which are the following. While safety at all Thermax sites is high, they found that the instructions that we have on the factory floors were all written in English, something that didn't even occur to us. At one site, the contractor had not issued formal appointment letters. Workers were getting compensated for overtime at the same 8-hour wage rate and not double. There were issues women were facing on some of Thermax's sites, which would not have occurred to even the women leaders to check when they visited these sites. It didn't even occur to someone like me until it was actually brought to my attention. For instance, one site had 2 women workers, but no separate toilets for them. On another, no maternity leave was being provided. And if a woman got pregnant, she had to leave the job. Lack of creche facilities, sanitary napkins on site were recurring gaps across units. In short, it was an eye-opener. Any change in mindset and practices needs to start at the top of an organization. I remember many years ago, the board of our company had decided to focus on safety, since Thermax was growing rapidly and took on a number of projects at various sites. Previously, only an accident that led to death was brought to the board. But once overall safety was prioritized, every board meeting started with accidents, near misses, processes put in place to prevent near misses, training, and timelines. It was done with the intent to make it known to the entire company that this was critical and important. To discuss learnings and how it could have been avoided in the first place. Even though pulling up safety meant a higher investment, it meant being able to sleep at night, knowing that human beings who belong to families are working in a safe environment, and that in the long run, a responsible business is a successful business. Thermax is trying to replicate this approach to integrate SOCO into its business as usual. While SOCO at Thermax started with my mother, Anu Aga, and myself, findings of the reflection journey were taken to our MD and the board to enlist their buy-in. Luckily, they readily agreed. That's when we started creating awareness across our business units. Then came the challenge of actually integrating SOCO. It was clear that unlike safety, wherein people had no choice but to follow, here we didn't want it to become an exercise of tick marks, even though we were signatories to the social compact. Only if people truly believe that every human being has a right to a dignified and equitable life, and then outcomes are measured and tracked at the highest levels, will this movement be co-owned, well integrated, and sustainable within the company's daily run. Fortunately, it did not take us very long to create a buy-in across heads of businesses, HR, IR, and some of our employees. Given this collective buy-in, a cross-level team was created to integrate SOCO into businesses with the autonomy to decide what they wanted to prioritize for immediate action. I am still not convinced we have integrated SOCO in all our businesses. It is still being predominantly driven through HR rather than down the line. I hope a time comes when each individual is convinced that it's the right thing to do. Within Thermax, we have decided to focus on 4 of the 6 outcomes: wages, safety, social security, and gender equality. These were prioritized for immediate integration across all business units of Thermax, its 8 factories and multiple sites. All business unit heads and factory heads were oriented to a common planning and tracking mechanism to ensure progress on these standards, and convened together in their first progress update meeting with the leadership in September 2021. Just last week, we partnered with Bajaj Auto, along with Ajivika and Dasra, to start our first Worker Facilitation Center, which is the WFC, within the Pune Industrial Belt, PCMC. Rajiv from Ajivika mentioned that this is the 21st WFC in the country, which is wonderful. This center and later a mobile van will provide a safe space for informal workers of any company. They will be counseled, they will be provided information and support with social security and government entitled schemes, grievance redress mechanisms, ESICPF, a facilitation desk for getting their cards, Aadhaar cards, medical insurance, and over time, hopefully working with their employers, ensuring gender equality in pay, introducing mechanisms like POSH for women workers, and so on. We had invited the Deputy Labour Commissioner, who was very keen to partner with us, since he mentioned that the WFC is actually doing what the government ought to be doing. And so we hope we can partner with them. There is a lot more that I am now aware of, thanks to the Social Compact, especially through Ajivika Bureau and the Center for Social Justice. One of the key learnings for me personally pertains to the fault lines in the existing engagement pattern in industry towards India's agrarian informal workforce. A complete lack of written contracts, which results in loopholes and no clear answers related to the question of responsibility of their well-being. It also makes them untraceable in an administrative sense. The juxtaposition of an invisible worker in a visible crisis needs to be acknowledged and proactively resolved. We are all guilty. The approach cannot and is not headed by any one stakeholder, industry leader, or NGO. Rather, SOCO is a collective approach wherein various stakeholders and like-minded partners have come together with the vision to improve the social component of ESG. Social is often misunderstood as CSR, but as my good friend Pradeep Bhargava points out, it is actually CR, which is corporate responsibility. It is about very definitely improving core worker practices irrespective of their status. Social compact was conceptualized and even today functions keeping the worker voice at the center of all ideas, solutions, and processes. I compare it to the school education in our country, which is also one that needs urgent attention and fixing. In our education system, we seem to have forgotten the voice of the child. In the same way, we seem to have forgotten the voice of our informal workforce. Let us reflect back upon the collective approach that I briefly discussed a short while ago. Employers, whether in the form of principal employers, vendors, or contractors, are all stakeholders closest to the workers. In this context, collaborative is not just limited to my own capacity as an industrialist, but it includes responsibilities down the supply chain. This is certainly not to confuse the approach as blackmail or a threat, but rather leading by example. Saying, we are trying these changes in our approach towards the workforce that we employ. Why don't you reflect on these and try them out? We are here to support you. The intent here is to scale the impact while emphasizing upon the self-reflective nature of the remedial change and actions needed. As a principal employer, I am also in a position to offer support to my contractors and vendors in implementing the relevant policy changes or solutions. Today, SOCO has 29 vendor companies that have signed up. If we were to imagine the next concentric circle outside employers, we have industry associations, investors, government, and rating agencies amongst the key groups that influences the choices and pathway that a business takes. All of these have a key role to play. Our impact can be fully scaled only with a change in attitude within all these stakeholders. A case in point here is the role that, say, for example, industry associations like CII and FICCI have been playing so far. A national committee for informal and migrant workers has been formed within CII, which actually includes representatives from corporates as well as civil society for the first time to formalize the agenda for worker well-being among its member companies. A similar committee has been formed under FICCI Gujarat. Both of them not only enable scale for social compact by allowing us access to their large network of companies, but also support in amplification by lending the credibility of their name. There is a need for an ecosystem approach wherein each stakeholder plays their role to ensure that businesses grow responsibly in a sustainable manner. There is an increasing traction around the ESG conversation in the investor community and among rating companies. A recent report from CRISIL shows that ESG funds are outperforming general equity. The S component forms 25% of the score. The S component is getting greater attention in the wake of the pandemic, and 40% organizations are considering these parameters in their investment and lending decisions. and I'm sure this is going to get more and more. Recognizing that companies often lack visibility of their worker well-being in their supply chain, the social in the ESG evaluation has expanded to diversity, safety, treatment of families, compliance to laws, supply chain, communities, and societies. All of these are a part of SOCO. Even bankers, financiers, NBFCs, VC, and PE firms in India are beginning to ask about concrete ESG plans from each business. SEBI's Business Responsibility and Sustainability Reporting, the BRSR guidelines, are mandatory for the top 1,000 companies, which includes all their suppliers too. It has a clear emphasis on disclosure and transparency to ensure inclusive and sustainable practices, not only in companies' own operations, but also the entire supply chain, including suppliers, customers, and their stakeholders too. In the next few months, we will be engaging with the investor community, lenders, and rating agencies. They can be a huge influence to trigger change in attitudes for their portfolios by integrating specific criteria on the S of ESG in their due diligence parameters, just like we are doing for E, which is the environment today. This change in attitude and action on the ground was visibly observed when environmental concerns were at center stage 2 decades ago. Standards were set and compliance was recorded on the part of the investee community. In this sense, incentives can be optimized to cause revision in attitudes towards compliance and to design better employment practices. The current mood in India is positively poised, and different paradigms, including the new labor law codes, the SEBI's BRSR, give an effective nudge to our work at Social Compact. With the new definitions of employer and employee, which puts onus of contractual workers on the employers, and the reclassification of wages, companies will have to amend certain policies to be in compliance with the law. Another very large stakeholder is the government. They are not only the biggest customers for goods, services, and infrastructure projects, but they are the largest employers, whether it be railways, defense, police, PSUs, mining, civic services, or academic institutions, both state and central, and effectively pay for the millions of temporary and contract workers from their budgets. We can see a world of change and corrections if governments resolve to ensure the 6 pillars of SOCO in their enterprises and with their key suppliers of goods and services. At a recent event organized by the UN South Asia Forum on Business and Human Rights, there was a consensus about the need to reclaim the word human rights and humanize it. And in a subsequent session at the same event, this thought was extended to say that it is time to move beyond human rights and that speak about child labor and bondage to human dignity through living wages and secured social security for all. One of the foremost points of resistance to any sustainable business practice is the factor of cost. How much will I have to pay to get this done? Is the question that we are often asked. An increase in cost leads to reduced profits and finally, of course, the viability of the business. However, and I can say this from a place of some experience in the matter, it is not entirely true. One can look at it as a cost or an investment. One, of course, hits the P&L and the other the balance sheet. At Thermax, about 12 years ago, we decided to start a build, own, operate subsidiary called Thermax On-Site Energy Systems Limited that sells green steam instead of selling a boiler, which in short, in business sense, translated to saying no to coal. 12 years ago, coal was not a dirty word. Banks were funding several projects and there was a lot of money to be made. However, we decided that this business would be totally green, which meant perhaps less growth and therefore relatively reduced profits at that time. But we were committed and decided to stick to our purpose. 10 years later, the world has changed. Customers are keen on decarbonization and thus opt for Thermax as a partner in their energy transition. Today, TOSL is growing with a decent return on investment and remains focused on green solutions. It's a win-win-win for customers, for the environment, and for Thermax. As my father, the ex-CMD of Thermax, Mr. Raga, strongly believed and practiced, profit is not just a set of figures, but of values. In principle, it remains true and applicable now for reform in employment practices as it did then for energy transition. We saw that those who took care of their workers during the first and second waves of COVID had less issues restarting their operations once the lockdowns were lifted. Keeping the workers' needs in mind and responding to them effectively builds loyalty and trust, as it does with most human beings. I would like this opportunity to share headline findings from a global study conducted by Living Wages Foundation and the Cardiff Business School, which will be published later this year. LWF has a network of close to 10,000 accredited employers paying a real living wage, calculated as a wage people need to live. 93% of these employers reported that paying a real living wage benefited the business. 75% reported improved retention. 85% reported an enhanced reputational benefit, which in turn serves to attract better talent. KPMG, during its first year of paying a real living wage, found that turnover of their cleaning staff fell from 44% to 27%. Apart from the above listed benefits, they added that the initial increased cost of paying living wages and other benefits was offset by the reduction in recruitment costs. Moreover, a leading industrialist who is a member of SOCO mentioned in a recent CNBC interview that the choice of sacrificing margins to spend on worker well-being is a false one because it is an investment that yields longer-term returns in terms of improved productivity and better retention of workers rather than being seen as an expense. From the word go, it was evident that a buy-in at all levels of the organization was required to make SOCO a sustainable practice, as opposed to a feel-good program or just an initiative. Within our company, not only do we report SOCO progress to the board, but I have written and spoken about the movement at our quarterly all-hands meet. I wrote about the essence and rationale of our engagement in our in-house magazine Fireside that is read by many of our employees and their families and some of our customers and well-wishers. It has to be communicated, communicated, and communicated. The sensitivity and attitude of leadership, the board, and different levels of management do go a long way and reflect upon compliance and impact. At Thermax, I am hopeful that we will replicate and integrate SOCO into our business as usual, not just for our strategic business units at our manufacturing locations and sites, but with some of our customers and vendors too. I spoke about our BOO subsidiary TOSL, wherein we have a long-term partnership with our customers. Here, we have started initiating conversations, partnering with our customers to get up more facilitation centers together. Through a walk-in center located within a busy industry hub and a mobile unit, it will immensely ease the access to government schemes. We feel that working with a worker facilitation center, using perhaps CSR funds, which are mandatory, since it is available for any informal worker in the area, it could be an effective way to engage partners getting into SOCO. So start with the WFC with your CSR funds, and then start reflecting and thinking about SOCO, making it part of your business. As my mother Anuaga once mentioned, it is time for leaders to move beyond the fear of what will be unearthed if they dig deep and actually step up to do the right thing. We have gained tremendous momentum in the past 2 years, but we have a long way to go. There is a need to mainstream our collective aspiration that a responsible business can indeed thrive as a successful one. As we gear up to scale the movement, we are also looking to generate evidence of the impact of good labor practices on the long-term well-being of businesses. And we would love to join hands with ISLE to effectively capture comparative perspectives on decent work, helping industry move forward. A moral case for action is evident, and we are also making efforts within our individual companies to create a feedback loop, capturing the worker's voice to demonstrate impact. However, there is a need for research-backed insights in this space to entice more and more stakeholders to partner with us. All of us at Social Compact take every opportunity to speak and write about the essence and progress of our movement at different forums and platforms to bring more attention and action to the cause. In the same spirit, I invite all of you to join in and support us with your expertise and resources. Help us spread the word, scale impact, and make transformational changes in the lives of these workers. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to address all of you. Once again, I refer to something that my mother and all of us strongly believe in, and that is business cannot survive in a society that fails. Let's join hands to synergistically redefine the future of work and the future of business for India. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Ms. Meher Pudumjee, for a lucid, thoughtful, and engaging lecture. As I heard you, there was some wishful thinking in my mind. I wish that there were more corporate leaders in India who had a social conscience and the desire to be concerned citizens, which you have outlined so vividly. I do believe that initiatives such as the Social Compact are exceedingly important because it is a part of a searching process in the corporate sector, because we are addressing the problems of about 250 million workers, informal workers in India's economy, who do not have a voice, who are not audible, who are not even visible to those who are privileged in our society. So what you have said, Meher, comes to me as a breath of fresh air. But I do want to assure you that we are not just engaged in abstract academic pursuits or academic research. The Indian Society of Labor Economics has always intersected with and interacted with civil society, policy practitioners, industry leaders, trade union leaders. This has been our intellectual tradition. This has been part of our democratic tradition. So you are, in a sense, a part of our larger universe, where people come from different worlds to interact with us and to engage with us. We have some time, I think, Priyanka, until 4:15. We started at 3:15. Okay. So we watched and heard the rise of Mr. Trump. We watched Brexit. as you know, the momentum of discontents led to crisis and typically to political upheavals on the part of populist leaders who mobilized these discontents. Okay, so it's been with us for a long time. Why is it that it takes a pandemic to bring about this cognition? Why is it that even now there isn't enough cognition, and forgive me for being candid, that recovery is K-shaped, that incomes are recovering for those in the top percentile, in the top decile of the population. Incomes are continuing to contract for those in the bottom decile or the bottom half of the population. And this is true in India, this is true in the United States, this is true almost everywhere. Okay, so that's one sort of big picture reality I want to put before you. Second, we need to recognize that informal workers have been with us for a long time. If we look at the work of many of my colleagues, including Professor Sharma, Professor Ajit Ghosh, if we look at let's forget the informal services sector, let's forget the informal power loom sector, let's look at the formal organized sector. 70% of the workers in the formal organized sector, Professor Sharma, you and many others have shown, are informal workers, which means they have no social protection, they have no superannuation benefits, they have no standard workers' rights. And indeed, a large number of manufacturing firms and trading firms in India use labor contractors to hire labor because they don't want them on their rolls. So there is this harsh opposite reality that we also confront. And Professor Krishnamurthy said to us this morning that those of us who work in this domain must be fearless in stating what the realities are. Now, I think what you have said is something that is admirable, that is commendable, and I wish you can spread the word. I wish you can lead by example, but there have been many such movements in the past. You know, you go back to the work of Karl Polanyi and the Great Transformation. But it took a trade union movements everywhere to transform that reality. That did not come from a self-enlightenment on the part of the capitalist class. So maybe this time is different. But I would like you to reflect on this bigger picture, because the transformation of a microcosm into a macrocosm is a long journey. Just as small civil society organization can transform a village, yeah. But you know, just as one drop of water does not make a monsoon, that one Banka Roy or Aruna Roy does not make a social transformation. So I want you to reflect a little bit with your SOCO colleagues and those who have conceptualized this initiative to see how you can take this beyond the group, not so much leading by example, but by some more effective forms of persuasion. Thank you very much, Meher, for being with us. I wish you were here in person. It would have led to more animated discussion, but there will be other occasions, and
Sure.
we will indeed discuss some of these issues further and get back to you.
Thank you.
And
Thank you very much.
And bon voyage.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Thank you, Ms. Pudumjee, for this very enriching lecture. Thank you for joining in. Thank you, Professor Nayyar, for moderating this lecture.